An Army drill sergeant bets an 8-year-old girl can't even do 5 push-ups. The crowd laughs. He mocks her. But what happens next shocks everyone into silence. She doesn't stop at 5. Not even close. What begins as a joke turns into a moment that will shake the entire base and this hardened soldier's life forever. But this little girl isn't just strong. She's hiding a reason that no one sees coming. And what the sergeant doesn't know yet is that this challenge is only the beginning. Behind her quiet strength lies a truth that could bring everything crashing down. How could one child's push-ups unravel a legacy built on fear and force a man to face everything he thought he knew about power? Every story brings us a little closer together. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. It's a joy to see how far this family of listeners reaches. The late morning sun beat down on Fort Braxton's parade grounds as families gathered for the annual Military Family Day. Children laughed and ran between activity stations, while parents watched proudly, many wearing civilian clothes instead of their usual uniforms. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and the smell of grilled hot dogs and hamburgers wafted through the air. At the push-up demonstration area, Drill Sergeant Buck Morrison stood with his legs planted wide, arms crossed over his chest. His weathered face wore its usual stern expression as he watched recruits demonstrating proper push-up form to small groups of visitors. After 25 years of breaking in new soldiers, he knew his reputation preceded him. The nervous glances from passing families told him they recognized the infamous Sergeant Morrison. "Remember, it's all about form," he barked at a young recruit who was leading the demonstrations. "Back straight as a board, none of that sagging in the middle. You're not a snake." The recruit stiffened and corrected his posture immediately. Buck allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. This was what he did best, maintaining discipline and high standards. No exceptions, no excuses. A small movement caught his eye. A tiny figure had separated from the crowd and was walking toward him with determined steps. Buck looked down to see a young Asian girl, probably around 8 years old, staring up at him with serious dark eyes. She wore a neat pink t-shirt with unicorns on it, but her stance was almost military in its precision. "Excuse me, Sergeant," she said in a clear voice that carried surprising confidence. "May I try the push-up challenge?" Buck let out a short laugh that made nearby parents turn their heads. "This isn't a playground, little lady. These demonstrations are for people who want to learn about real military fitness." The girl, he would later learn her name was Chloe Miller, didn't back down. "I know how to do proper push-ups. My daddy taught me before he deployed." Something about her calm certainty irritated Buck. He was used to recruits who trembled at his approach, not little girls in unicorn shirts who looked at him like he was any other grown-up. "Oh, really?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I suppose your daddy told you that you're as strong as a soldier too?" A small crowd had started to gather, drawn by the unusual confrontation. Buck could hear their murmured conversations and see the disapproving looks from some parents. But he was Drill Sergeant Morrison. He didn't coddle anyone, not even children. "I practice every day," Chloe said simply. "Please let me try." Buck's irritation grew into something darker. This girl needed to learn that the military wasn't about participation trophies and pat-on-the-back encouragement. "Tell you what," he announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "If you can do 5 proper push-ups, and I mean proper military form, not those half-hearted things kids do in gym class, I'll personally give you a tour of the entire base." He saw several people in the crowd exchange worried glances. Good. They understood what he was doing, teaching a necessary lesson about limits and reality. "But when you fail," he continued, "you'll have to announce to everyone here that you should have listened to Sergeant Morrison. Deal?" The crowd had grown larger now. Buck could see phones being pulled out to record what was happening. Perfect. Let them see how he handled overconfident civilians who thought military standards were a joke. Chloe looked at the ground for a moment, and Buck thought she was finally going to back down. But then she raised her head and met his eyes directly. "Deal," she said quietly. Buck gestured to the exercise mat with exaggerated courtesy. "Then by all means, show us what you can do." Chloe walked to the mat and took her position, her small hands pressed flat against the rubber surface as she set her feet. Buck noticed her positioning was actually correct. Feet together, hands shoulder-width apart, back straight. "Remember," he called out, unable to resist twisting the knife. "Chest has to touch the ground and arms have to fully extend. No cheating." The girl didn't respond. She had closed her eyes and appeared to be taking deep breaths. The crowd had fallen completely silent, creating an arena-like atmosphere around the small figure and the towering drill sergeant. Buck stood ready to count, his face set in a smirk. He had seen thousands of push-ups in his career. He knew exactly how this would end, with a valuable lesson about respecting military standards and knowing your place. But as Chloe Miller opened her eyes and prepared to begin her first push-up, something in her expression made Buck's smirk falter slightly. There was no fear there, no uncertainty, only pure, quiet determination. The crowd held its breath as the small girl in the unicorn shirt prepared to either triumph or be humiliated in front of dozens of strangers. Buck Morrison stood ready to count, not yet knowing that he was about to witness something that would shake the very foundation of his beliefs about strength, courage, and what it truly meant to be tough. Chloe took one final deep breath and lowered herself into the first push-up. Her form was impeccable, back straight as a ruler, elbows tucked close to her body, chest touching the ground before pushing back up with controlled strength. Buck's eyebrows rose slightly as she completed the first repetition with perfect military precision. "1," he called out, unable to keep a note of surprise from his voice. Without pausing, Chloe continued. Down and up, her movements smooth and practiced. 2, 3, 4, 5. Buck counted, his voice growing quieter with each number. But Chloe didn't stop at 5. She kept going, her small arms working like pistons, her breathing steady and controlled. The crowd's silence deepened as the numbers climbed higher. 10, 15, 20. Buck's voice had lost all its previous mockery. He stood rooted to the spot, watching as this 8-year-old girl shattered every assumption he'd made about her. Phones appeared everywhere in the crowd recording the remarkable scene. Parents lifted their children onto their shoulders for a better view. Several of Buck's own recruits stood slack-jawed, watching their fearsome drill sergeant being humbled by a little girl in a unicorn shirt. 25, 30. Chloe's form remained perfect, her pace steady. Small beads of sweat appeared on her forehead, but her expression stayed focused and calm. Her arms trembled slightly now, but she didn't falter. Buck heard whispers rippling through the crowd. Is this for real? Look at her form. Someone's posting this on social media right now. He felt his face growing hot, but he couldn't stop counting. 35, 40. A woman in the crowd, probably another military mom, started clapping softly. The rhythm spread until dozens of people were clapping in time with Chloe's push-ups, creating a steady beat that seemed to give her even more strength. 45, 46, 47, 48, 49. Buck's voice was barely above a whisper now. The crowd leaned forward collectively, holding their breath. 50. The word exploded from the crowd as Chloe completed her final push-up. She held the up position for a moment, arms straight and steady, before carefully lowering her knees to the mat and standing up. Her face was flushed and sweaty, but she stood tall, looking directly at Buck. The silence lasted for exactly 2 seconds before the crowd erupted. Cheers and applause thundered across the parade grounds. Parents hugged their children, recruits exchanged amazed looks, and phones kept recording as Chloe simply stood there breathing heavily but maintaining her composure. That's General Miller's daughter, someone in the crowd called out. She's been training while he's deployed. Buck felt the blood drain from his face as more phones appeared, capturing his stunned expression. He could already imagine the social media posts. Watch this little girl humble cocky drill sergeant, military brat school's arrogant instructor. His ears rang with the continuing applause and excited chatter. Did you see that 50 perfect push-ups? Someone send this to General Miller overseas. That sergeant sure got what was coming to him. I've never seen anything like it. Buck watched helplessly as several parents approached Chloe, congratulating her and asking to take selfies with her. She accepted their praise quietly, thanking them with simple nods, but her eyes kept returning to Buck. There was no triumph in her gaze, no gloating, just that same quiet determination he'd dismissed earlier. The realization of what he'd done hit Buck like a physical blow. He'd tried to publicly humiliate a child, a military child no less, whose father was serving overseas. And not just any soldier's child, but General Miller's daughter. He'd turned what should have been a positive family day event into a spectacle of his own arrogance. Already he could see people hunched over their phones, typing rapidly. Videos were being shared, comments were being posted. By the end of the day, this incident would be all over military social media channels. By tomorrow, it would probably reach civilian networks too. Buck took an unsteady step backward, then another. For the first time in his 25-year career, he had no sharp comments, no authoritative bark, no control over the situation. The crowd parted automatically as he retreated, some people still filming, others shaking their heads in disapproval. As he turned to leave, he heard a small voice behind him. "Thank you for counting, Sergeant Morrison." Chloe's words carried no sarcasm, no victory, just simple courtesy. Somehow that made it even worse. Buck walked away quickly, his usual rigid posture slightly slumped. Behind him, he could still hear the excited conversations and the clicking of phone cameras. His mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. The viral videos, the inevitable questions from his superiors, the damage to his carefully maintained reputation. But worst of all was the memory of that small, determined face looking up at him, showing him what real strength looked like while he had tried to tear her down. Buck sat at his desk in the training office, staring at his computer screen in disbelief. The video of Chloe's push-up demonstration had spread like wildfire across military social media channels. Over 10,000 views already, and the comments were brutal. What kind of drill sergeant picks on a little girl? Somebody needs to teach this bully a lesson. Wait until her father sees this. His phone buzzed with a message from the base commander's office. "Report to Colonel Miller's office immediately." Buck's stomach clenched. He knew Colonel Janet Miller had recently taken command, but he hadn't connected the dots until now. Chloe Miller, Janet Miller. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Walking down the hallway to Colonel Miller's office, Buck noticed how other officers and enlisted personnel quickly looked away or ducked into doorways to avoid him. His reputation for being tough had always kept people at a distance, but this was different. This was shame. The colonel's assistant waved him straight in. Colonel Janet Miller sat behind her desk, her posture military perfect, but her expression cold enough to freeze water. On her computer screen, Buck could see the paused video of himself towering over Chloe. "Sergeant Morrison," Colonel Miller said, her voice carefully controlled. "Please have a seat." Buck lowered himself into the chair, his usual rigid posture failing him. "Ma'am, I can explain." "Can you?" Colonel Miller interrupted, turning her screen so he could see it better. "Can you explain why my 8-year-old daughter, who has been practicing push-ups every night while video chatting with her deployed father, became the subject of your public mockery?" Buck's throat went dry. "I didn't know she was your daughter, ma'am." "Would it have made a difference?" Colonel Miller's eyes narrowed. "Should it make a difference? Because from where I sit, Sergeant, this incident perfectly illustrates the concerns that brought me here in the first place." She pulled out a thick folder and opened it on her desk. 3 complaints in the past month about excessive physical punishment during training. 5 recruits sent to medical with heat exhaustion after you forced them to repeat drills in 100-degree weather. Multiple reports of verbal abuse that goes far beyond standard military discipline. Buck felt sweat forming on his forehead. He'd known about the investigation, but he hadn't realized Colonel Miller was leading it personally. "Ma'am, my methods may be tough, but they produce results. These recruits, Colonel Miller cut in, are someone's children too, Sergeant. Just like Chloe. They're here to be trained, not broken." She closed the folder with a sharp snap. "And now, I have video evidence of you attempting to humiliate a child at what was supposed to be a family-friendly event." Buck's carefully constructed defenses crumbled. For years, he'd justified his harsh methods as necessary for creating tough soldiers. But watching himself loom over that small, determined girl on the colonel's screen, he couldn't find any justification. "The investigation into your training methods was already serious, Sergeant Morrison," Colonel Miller continued. "This incident has now made it very public. My inbox is flooded with emails from military families and veterans demanding action." She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. "And do you know what makes this even more difficult? My daughter defended you this morning. She said you counted fairly and thanked her properly. She showed more maturity and professionalism than you did." The words hit Buck like physical blows. He remembered Chloe's quiet thank you after the demonstration, how she'd shown no anger or triumph despite his attempt to embarrass her. "Your career is hanging by a thread, Sergeant," Colonel Miller said. "The investigation will continue, but now it has the attention of the entire base community. I suggest you think very carefully about your training methods and your behavior going forward." Buck stood at attention, his voice hoarse. "Yes, ma'am." Dismissed. Walking back to his office, Buck felt the weight of every stare, every whispered comment. His phone buzzed again. Another video share, another critical comment. The carefully constructed walls of his authority were crumbling around him, and for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure how to rebuild them. He passed the parade grounds where the family day event had taken place. The push-up mats were still there, and for a moment, he saw Chloe again, her small form executing perfect push-ups while he counted. She hadn't needed his harsh methods or intimidation to show incredible strength. She'd trained herself, encouraged by a father who loved her, supported by a mother who believed in her. Buck reached his office and closed the door, sitting heavily in his chair. On his desk, a stack of training reports awaited his review, reports filled with his usual demanding standards and harsh consequences. For the first time, he looked at them and saw not discipline but bullying, not strength but fear. His career, his reputation, everything he'd built over 25 years of service, it was all in jeopardy now. And the worst part was, a small voice in his head whispered, maybe it should be. Buck Morrison sat in his parked car outside the Warrior Family Fitness Center, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. The modest brick building sat between a grocery store and a dry cleaner's, its windows decorated with motivational quotes and American flags. A steady stream of people, mostly women and children, moved in and out of the front doors. He'd spent the past 2 days digging through social media and asking careful questions around the base, trying to piece together how an 8-year-old girl had managed to humiliate him so thoroughly. The trail had led him here to this small gym 5 miles from Fort Braxton's main gate. "Just get it over with," he muttered to himself, stepping out of his car. He'd changed into civilian clothes, jeans and a plain black t-shirt, hoping to avoid recognition. The viral video of his confrontation with Chloe had reached over 50,000 views now, and he couldn't take any more dirty looks or whispered comments. A bell chimed as he pushed open the front door. The interior was nothing like the hardcore training facilities he was used to. Cheerful yellow walls displayed photos of military families working out together. Exercise equipment shared space with play areas filled with toys and books. "Welcome to Warrior Family Fitness." A muscular woman in her early 40s approached him with a bright smile. "I'm Amanda Rodriguez. How can I help you today?" Buck recognized her immediately from his research. Former Marine Corps Staff Sergeant, decorated combat veteran, and now owner of this facility. She'd started the gym 5 years ago specifically to support military families dealing with deployments. Buck hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm Buck Morrison. I'm here about Chloe Miller." Amanda's warm smile vanished. "Ah, the drill sergeant from the video." She crossed her arms, her stance shifting subtly into a more defensive position. "What about Chloe?" Buck struggled to find the right words. "I need to understand. How did she get so strong? I've been training recruits for 20 years, and I've never seen form that perfect, even from adults." Amanda studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward her office. "Come on, we should talk privately." The office was small but organized, with more family photos on the walls. Amanda sat behind her desk and motioned for Buck to take the visitor's chair. "First," she said, "let me be clear. Chloe is one of my star students, and I'm very protective of her. If you're here looking for some way to minimize what happened or protect your ego, you can leave right now. Buck shook his head quickly. No, ma'am, I just need to understand, please. Amanda's expression softened slightly. Chloe started coming here 6 months ago, right after her father deployed. She was struggling with the separation, like many military kids do. But instead of acting out, she decided she wanted to get stronger. She turned her computer monitor around, showing a spreadsheet filled with detailed workout logs. She comes in 5 days a week, never misses a session. She video calls her dad every night to show him her progress. The push-ups? That's just one part of her routine. She can do pull-ups, planks, squats, all with perfect form because she practices constantly. Buck leaned forward, scanning the logs with growing amazement. 5 days a week? For 6 months? While maintaining straight A's in school, Amanda added, and helping her mom with household chores, and never, ever complaining. She fixed Buck with a stern look. That's the kind of strength you can't build through intimidation, Sergeant Morrison. Buck felt his face grow hot with shame. I didn't know. No, you didn't, Amanda agreed. You saw a little girl and assumed weakness, just like you see recruits and assume they need to be broken down to be built up. She stood and walked to a photo on the wall, showing her with a group of children in workout gear. Chloe was among them, beaming at the camera. These kids are already strong. They deal with more stress and uncertainty before age 10 than many adults ever face. They don't need anyone making their lives harder. Buck stared at Chloe's smiling face in the photo, remembering how quietly confident she'd been that day on the parade grounds. No bragging, no attitude, just pure determination and discipline. The thing is, Amanda continued, returning to her desk, Chloe didn't train this hard to show up a drill sergeant or prove anything to anyone except her dad. She did it because it made her feel closer to him while he's away. That's the kind of motivation that creates real strength. Buck nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. He'd spent years believing that strength came from fear and punishment, from breaking people down. But here was evidence of something entirely different. Strength built on love, support, and personal determination. Thank you, he said quietly, standing to leave. I appreciate you taking the time to explain. Amanda walked him to the door. You know, Sergeant Morrison, we offer training programs for adults too, including military personnel who might want to learn a different approach to building strength. She handed him a business card. Just something to think about. Buck looked down at the card, then back at the gym full of families working out together, encouraging each other, building each other up instead of tearing down. For the first time since the incident, he felt something besides shame. He felt hope. There's something else you should know about Chloe, Amanda said, gesturing for Buck to sit back down. Her expression had softened, showing a mix of pride and concern. The push-ups, the training, it's all part of something bigger. Buck settled back into the chair, noticing for the first time a collection of handmade cards pinned to Amanda's bulletin board. Each one was decorated with childish drawings of soldiers and American flags. Her father, Staff Sergeant David Miller, is on his 3rd deployment overseas, Amanda explained, pulling out a photo from her desk drawer. This was taken the day before he left. The picture showed Chloe perched on her father's shoulders, both of them laughing. Staff Sergeant Miller wore his combat uniform, and Chloe had on a miniature matching outfit. The joy in their faces made Buck's chest tighten unexpectedly. Chloe started training here the very next day after he deployed, Amanda continued. She told me she wanted to surprise him when he comes home. Said she was going to show him she could be strong like Daddy. Buck swallowed hard, memories of his own childhood suddenly flooding back. How long has he been gone? 6 months now. 4 more to go. Amanda leaned forward. You know what Chloe does every single night? She records videos of her workouts to send to her father. Even when she's tired or having a bad day, she never misses one. Says it helps her feel closer to him. The words hit Buck like a physical blow. He remembered being 7 years old, writing letters to a father who would never read them, trying desperately to maintain a connection that had been severed by war. Colonel Miller, Janet, she's handling everything alone? Buck asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Amanda nodded. This is their 4th deployment as a family. Janet works full-time as a commander, manages the household, helps with homework, attends every school event, and still finds time to bring Chloe here 5 days a week because she knows how important it is to her daughter. Buck's mind drifted to his own mother, how she'd worked 2 jobs after his father died, how she'd somehow always found time to attend his little league games even when she was exhausted. He'd never fully appreciated the strength that took until this moment. Yesterday, Amanda said, pulling out her phone, Chloe asked me to record this message for her dad. I think you should see it. The video showed Chloe in workout clothes, her small face serious as she looked into the camera. Hi, Daddy. Today I did 50 push-ups in front of everyone at Family Day. I wanted to show them I'm getting stronger, just like you taught me. Mom says you'll be home in 122 days, and I'm going to keep practicing every day until then. I love you. Buck felt his eyes burning. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain his composure. I had no idea. The thing about military kids, Amanda said gently, is that they carry burdens most adults can't imagine. They learn to be strong because they have to be. But that strength comes from love, not fear. From wanting to make their parents proud, not from being broken down. Buck nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He thought about his own training methods, about how he'd followed in General Blackwood's footsteps, believing that harsh treatment and humiliation were necessary tools for building strength. How wrong he'd been. Colonel Miller, he said finally. How does she do it? Multiple deployments, commanding a base, raising a child alone. Amanda smiled. The same way your mother did it, I imagine. One day at a time with a lot of help from the community. She paused, studying his face. That's why I started this gym. Military families need support, not more challenges. They need people who understand what they're going through. Buck stood up slowly, his worldview shifting like tectonic plates. He'd spent years viewing strength through the lens of his own pain, perpetuating a cycle of hardship because it was all he knew. But here was a different kind of strength, the kind his mother had shown, the kind Colonel Miller demonstrated every day, the kind little Chloe was building with every determined push-up. Thank you, he said quietly, for helping me understand. Amanda stood and walked him to the door again. You know, Sergeant Morrison, sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit when we've been wrong about something. It takes real courage to change course. Buck paused in the doorway, watching as a young boy helped his little sister with a modified plank position, both of them giggling as their mother offered encouragement. He thought about Chloe doing her push-ups every night, sending messages into the void to maintain a connection with her absent father. He thought about his own mother, who had somehow found the strength to build a life for them after his father's death. For the first time in his 20-year military career, Drill Sergeant Buck Morrison wondered if perhaps he had been teaching the wrong lessons about strength all along. Buck sat in his dimly lit office, staring at the stack of training records Colonel Miller had requested. His conversation with Amanda at the gym still weighed heavily on his mind, as he began sorting through years of documentation. The clock on the wall ticked past 9 in the evening, but he couldn't leave, not until he understood why Colonel Miller needed these specific files. He opened the first folder, dated 3 years ago. Something about the numbers didn't add up. The success rate seemed impossibly high, especially given the increasingly difficult standards General Blackwood had implemented. Buck had always taken pride in those numbers, seeing them as proof that his harsh methods worked. Now, looking closer, doubt crept in. His phone buzzed. A text from General Blackwood. Make sure those files are properly prepared before handing them over. Buck's fingers hovered over the old training logs. He remembered Blackwood's mentorship when he first became a drill sergeant, how the general had shaped his approach to training. Strength through adversity, Blackwood always said. Sometimes you have to break them down to build them up. But as Buck dug deeper into the records, his stomach turned. He found incident reports that had been altered, training injuries that were never officially documented. In one case, a recruit's severe heat exhaustion had been logged as a minor dehydration issue. Buck remembered that day. Blackwood had personally intervened, insisting they maintain the training pace despite the dangerous temperatures. "Dear God," Buck whispered, pulling out more files. The pattern became clear. Every time a serious incident occurred, Blackwood found a way to minimize it in the records. Buck had witnessed many of these events firsthand, but Blackwood always had an explanation, a way of making it seem necessary for the greater good. His office door opened, and Colonel Miller stepped in. Her face showed the exhaustion of another long day, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Finding anything interesting, Sergeant Morrison?" she asked, closing the door behind her. Buck looked up, his desk covered in damning evidence. "Ma'am, I think you already know what I'm finding." Janet Miller pulled up a chair. "Tell me anyway. I need to hear it from you." "These reports," Buck said, spreading out several folders. "They're all doctored, training injuries covered up, incidents downplayed. And the success rates? They're impossible. We've been pushing recruits beyond safe limits to maintain these numbers." "And who directed these standards?" Miller asked quietly. "General Blackwood." The name felt bitter in Buck's mouth. "He always said we were building elite soldiers, that the end justified the means." Buck ran a hand over his face. "I believed him. God help me. I believed every word." Colonel Miller nodded slowly. 2 months ago, a recruit nearly died during an extended training exercise. The official report lists it as a minor incident, but my investigation suggests otherwise. That's what started all this. Buck remembered that day. Blackwood had pushed for the exercise to continue despite dangerous conditions, citing the need to maintain their exceptional training statistics. Buck had followed orders, ignoring his own misgivings. "The general's up for his second star," Miller continued. "His entire career is built on these training statistics. Every promotion, every commendation, all based on numbers that looked too good to be true because they were. And I helped him maintain those numbers," Buck said, the realization hitting him hard. "All those times he convinced me to push harder, to be tougher. It was never about making better soldiers." "It was about his career advancement," Miller finished. "And he used you, Sergeant Morrison. Used your dedication, your desire to excel, to help cover up his corruption." Buck thought about all the recruits he'd pushed to their limits and beyond, believing he was making them stronger. How many had he hurt in service of Blackwood's ambition? The weight of it pressed down on his chest like a physical burden. "When I saw you with Chloe at Family Day," Miller said, her voice softening, "I thought you were just another bully in uniform. But Amanda Rodriguez called me, told me about your visit, about how you've been wrestling with all this." Buck looked at the colonel, seeing not just a commanding officer but a mother fighting to protect others' children while raising her own. "What happens now?" "That depends on you," Miller replied. "General Blackwood doesn't know how much evidence I've gathered. He thinks this is just about your training methods. I need someone who is inside his system, someone who can testify about how these policies were implemented." "He'll destroy my career," Buck said, though the words held no fear, only resignation. "Probably," Miller agreed. "But ask yourself this. What would you tell Chloe about standing up to bullies if she were here right now?" Buck looked at the photos on Miller's desk. Chloe and her father, a family serving their country with honor and integrity. He thought about Amanda's words about real strength, about his own mother's quiet courage, about all the recruits who had suffered under his misguided methods. "I'll tell you everything," he said firmly. "Every incident, every cover-up, every time Blackwood pushed us past safe limits for his own benefit. Whatever you need to know." Colonel Miller stood, gathering some of the files. "It won't be easy. Blackwood has powerful friends." "No, ma'am," Buck agreed, "but it's right. And isn't that what we're supposed to be teaching our soldiers?" Buck was finishing his evening paperwork when he heard excited voices echoing through Fort Braxton's normally quiet administrative building. Looking up from his desk, he saw a small figure dart past his office door, followed by the sound of running footsteps and happy squeals. Curious, he stepped into the hallway just in time to see Chloe Miller racing toward a soldier in combat fatigues, his arm in a sling. The 8-year-old launched herself at the man, who caught her one-armed with practiced ease despite his injury. "Daddy!" Chloe's voice cracked with emotion as she wrapped her arms around her father's neck. "There's my strong girl," Staff Sergeant David Miller said, his own voice thick with feeling as he held his daughter close. Colonel Janet Miller stood a few steps behind them, wiping tears from her eyes as she watched the reunion. Buck felt like an intruder witnessing such a private moment, but he couldn't look away. "I've been practicing, Daddy," Chloe said, pulling back to look at her father's face. "I got so strong while you were gone. Want to see?" David Miller glanced at his wife, who nodded with a knowing smile. "Show him, sweetheart." Chloe immediately dropped to the floor, assuming the perfect push-up position Buck remembered from Family Day. Her father's eyes widened as she began executing push-ups with flawless form, counting out loud. 1, 2, 3. Buck watched David Miller's expression change from surprise to pride as his daughter continued. The staff sergeant knelt beside Chloe, counting along with her, his good hand gently touching her back in encouragement. 28, 29, 30. When Chloe finished, she jumped up, breathing hard but beaming. "That's not even my best, Daddy. I can do 50 now. Ms. Rodriguez helped me train every day so I could be strong like you." David Miller pulled his daughter close again, and Buck saw tears in the soldier's eyes. "You're already stronger than me, baby girl. So much stronger." Colonel Miller joined her family, wrapping her arms around both of them. Buck observed how they fit together, how natural their affection seemed. There was no fear in their embrace, no tension or uncertainty, just pure love and joy at being together again. The scene struck Buck like a physical blow. In all his years of training recruits, he'd never created connections like this. His relationships were built on intimidation and fear, pushing people to their limits not out of love but out of a misguided belief in General Blackwood's corrupted system. Chloe spotted him standing in his doorway and waved. "Sergeant Morrison, look who's home!" Buck straightened instinctively as Staff Sergeant Miller turned toward him. The younger soldier's eyes held no judgment, despite surely having heard about the Family Day incident. "Staff Sergeant Miller," Buck said formally. "Welcome home, soldier." "Thank you, Sergeant," David replied, then looked down at his daughter. "Is this the sergeant you told me about in your letters? The one you showed your push-ups to?" Chloe nodded proudly. "He didn't think I could do it, but I showed him. Just like you taught me, actions speak louder than words." Buck felt his face flush, but David Miller just smiled. "Sometimes we all need to be reminded that strength comes in many forms, don't we, Sergeant?" "Yes, sir," Buck replied softly. "Your daughter taught me that lesson well." Colonel Miller stepped forward, her arm still around her husband. "David was injured saving 2 of his men from an ambush. He's being awarded the Silver Star." Buck saw how Chloe looked up at her father, not with fear or awe, but with pure admiration and love. Here was a true leader, someone who earned respect through protection and sacrifice, rather than intimidation and fear. The contrast with General Blackwood's philosophy couldn't have been starker. Blackwood's corruption had twisted the very concept of strength, turning it into something ugly and dangerous. But watching the Miller family, Buck saw real strength, the kind that built people up instead of breaking them down. Chloe tugged on her father's good arm. "Can we show Sergeant Morrison the video of me doing 50 push-ups?" "Please?" "Another time, sweetheart," Colonel Miller said gently. "Daddy needs to rest. His arm is still healing." As the family turned to leave, Chloe ran back to give Buck a quick hug that left him stunned. "Thank you for being nice about my push-ups after, Sergeant Morrison. Even if you weren't nice at first." Buck watched them walk away together, their voices fading down the hallway. He thought about all the evidence in his office, the doctored reports, the covered-up injuries, the lies built on lies. He thought about General Blackwood's imminent promotion, about how many more recruits would suffer under his corrupted training standards. Then he thought about Chloe Miller, training every day to make her father proud, and Staff Sergeant Miller, willing to sacrifice himself to protect his men. That was the kind of strength the Army needed, not Blackwood's twisted version of it. Buck returned to his office and picked up his phone. His hand shook slightly as he dialed Colonel Miller's number, but his voice was steady when she answered. "Ma'am." I'm ready to make my official statement about General Blackwood. Everything I know, everything I've seen. All of it. The next morning, Buck sat across from Colonel Miller in her office, a thick folder resting on his lap. His hands trembled slightly as he placed it on her desk. 25 years of military service, his pension, and his reputation. Everything he'd worked for was contained in that simple manila folder. "Before I open this, Sergeant Morrison," Colonel Miller said quietly, "I want to make sure you understand what you're doing. This isn't just filing a complaint. You're preparing to testify against a general officer." Buck nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, ma'am, I understand. Your career is nothing compared to the lives at stake," Buck interrupted, then caught himself. "I apologize for speaking out of turn, ma'am." Colonel Miller's expression softened. "No apology needed, Sergeant. Please continue." Buck took a deep breath. "I've been part of General Blackwood's training program for 8 years. He convinced me that pushing recruits beyond their limits, breaking them down completely, was the only way to create strong soldiers." He gestured to the folder. "But those papers show how he's been covering up training injuries, falsifying medical reports, and intimidating witnesses to protect his promotion track." Colonel Miller opened the folder and began examining the documents. Her eyes widened as she turned page after page. "These injury reports, they've all been altered." "Yes, ma'am, the originals are there too. I kept copies of everything. General Blackwood had his staff doctors change the severity classifications, list training injuries as pre-existing conditions. 3 recruits nearly died last year from heat exhaustion, but the reports show they were treated for mild dehydration." "And you witnessed this personally?" Buck's face flushed with shame. "I did more than witness it, ma'am. I helped enforce it. Blackwood convinced me it was for the greater good, that we were creating elite soldiers. But we weren't creating anything except fear and broken bodies." Colonel Miller studied him carefully. "What changed your mind?" "Your daughter," Buck admitted. "Watching her train to make her father proud, seeing how Staff Sergeant Miller earned respect through protection rather than fear, it made me realize how wrong we've been. Real strength isn't about breaking people, it's about building them up." Colonel Miller nodded slowly, continuing to examine the evidence. "This is comprehensive, Sergeant. Medical reports, training logs, witness statements. You've documented everything." "General Blackwood trusted me completely, ma'am. I had access to all of it." Buck's voice grew harder. "He's up for his 2nd star next month. If he gets that promotion, he'll be in charge of training standards for the entire Eastern Seaboard." "You realize he won't go down easily," Colonel Miller warned. "He has powerful friends at the Pentagon, connections in Congress. They'll try to discredit you, paint you as a disgruntled employee trying to damage his reputation." "I know, ma'am, but I can't stay silent anymore, not when I know what he's doing to these kids." Colonel Miller closed the folder and leaned forward. "Why now, Sergeant? You've had this evidence for years. Why come forward at this moment?" Buck thought about Chloe's determined face as she did push-ups for her father, about Staff Sergeant Miller's injury earned protecting his men. "Because I finally remembered what real leadership looks like, ma'am, and it's not what General Blackwood's been teaching us." "This won't be easy," Colonel Miller said. "We'll need to build an airtight case. Every witness will have to be re-interviewed, every document authenticated. It could take months, and during that time you'll have to continue working under him without raising suspicion." "I understand, ma'am. I'm prepared for whatever comes." Colonel Miller stood and extended her hand. "Then let me be the first to thank you for your courage, Sergeant Morrison. It's not easy to stand up against corruption, especially when it means turning against your own mentor." Buck shook her hand, standing at attention. "Thank you, ma'am, but I don't feel very courageous. Mostly I feel ashamed it took me so long to do the right thing." "The right thing is never late, Sergeant. It arrives precisely when it's meant to." She picked up the folder. "I'll secure this evidence immediately and contact the Inspector General's office. From this moment on, everything we discuss about this case is confidential." "Yes, ma'am, and Colonel?" Buck hesitated. "I know this doesn't make up for how I treated Chloe at the Family Day event, but—" "Actually, Sergeant," Colonel Miller interrupted with a small smile, "I think that event might have been exactly what we all needed. Sometimes it takes a child to remind us of our better selves." Buck nodded, feeling the weight of his decision settling onto his shoulders. He knew the fight ahead would be brutal. General Blackwood wouldn't go down without unleashing every weapon in his considerable arsenal. But for the first time in years, Buck felt truly strong. Not the false strength of dominance and fear, but the real strength that comes from standing up for what's right. 3 days after Buck handed over the evidence to Colonel Miller, General Harrison Blackwood sat at his mahogany desk, his face twisted with rage as he read the report from one of his administrative assistants. The paper trembled in his hands. Morrison. He spat the name like poison. That ungrateful little snake. He picked up his phone and pressed a button. Get me Major Phillips now. Within minutes, a sharp knock echoed through his office. Enter, Blackwood barked. Major Phillips, a thin man with calculating eyes, stepped inside and saluted. Sir? Close the door. Blackwood waited until it clicked shut. We have a situation. Morrison's gone to Colonel Miller with evidence about our training program modifications. Phillips's face paled. How much does he know? Everything. Blackwood slammed his fist on the desk. 25 years I've mentored that fool, given him every opportunity, and this is how he repays me? By running to that meddling colonel with his conscience? What are your orders, sir? Blackwood's eyes narrowed. Pull Morrison's complete service record, every evaluation, every complaint, every minor infraction. I want everything from the day he enlisted. Yes, sir. Phillips hesitated. And the investigation? Leave Colonel Miller to me. I've already made some calls to friends at the Pentagon. They'll ensure any evidence Morrison provided gets tied up in red tape for months. Blackwood stood and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back. But Morrison needs to be dealt with immediately, before he can testify. Sir, if I may suggest, Phillips pulled out a notepad. There was an incident 3 months ago. A recruit claimed Morrison used excessive force during hand-to-hand combat training. Blackwood turned, his expression calculating. Tell me more. The recruit withdrew his complaint after Morrison explained the training protocols, but we still have the original statement. With some modification, it could support more serious charges. Like assault of a trainee, Blackwood nodded slowly. But we'll need more. One complaint won't be enough. I can find 2 or 3 others willing to amend their statements about Morrison's training methods, especially if it means avoiding another cycle of basic training. Blackwood smiled coldly. Do it, I want formal charges ready by tomorrow morning. And Phillips? His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Make sure our witnesses understand the importance of sticking to their stories. Permanently. Understood, sir. The next morning, Buck was preparing for his usual training routine when 2 military police officers entered his office. Sergeant Morrison, one announced formally. You're hereby relieved of duty pending investigation of serious charges. Please surrender your credentials and come with us. Buck's stomach dropped, but he kept his face neutral as he handed over his ID card. He knew this was coming, Blackwood's retaliation, but the speed of it still caught him off guard. In the JAG office, Buck sat stone-faced as the charges were read. Assault of trainees, conduct unbecoming, false reporting of training injuries, and abuse of authority. The evidence against him seemed overwhelming. Sworn statements from recruits, modified training logs, and carefully doctored medical reports that painted him as a sadistic trainer who took pleasure in hurting his charges. This is a court-martial offense, Sergeant, the JAG officer explained gravely. Given the severity of the charges and General Blackwood's personal interest in the case, you're looking at potential prison time, dishonorable discharge, and complete forfeiture of pension and benefits. Buck's throat tightened. Everything he'd built, his entire future, balanced on a knife's edge. He thought of his mother, how proud she'd been when he made sergeant, how devastated she'd be to see him in prison. The tribunal has been scheduled for next week, the officer continued. General Blackwood has personally selected the panel members. Of course he had. Buck recognized the names, all officers who owed their careers to Blackwood's patronage. The deck was stacked against him before the trial even began. Back in his quarters, under house arrest, Buck sat on his bed with his head in his hands. His phone buzzed. Another message from his mother. worried about the sudden charges. He couldn't bring himself to answer. A knock at his door made him look up. Colonel Miller entered, her face grim. "They're moving faster than we anticipated," she said without preamble. "Blackwood's called in every favor he has to fast-track these charges." "He's trying to discredit me before I can testify," Buck replied wearily. "Make sure no one believes anything I say about his cover-ups." The Inspector General's office is reviewing our evidence, but Blackwood's friends are throwing up roadblocks. It could take weeks to cut through the red tape. Colonel Miller's expression hardened, and now he's stacked the court-martial panel with his own people. Buck nodded slowly. He's always been thorough. I taught him everything I knew about our operation, and now he's using it against me. "We're not giving up," Colonel Miller insisted. "My legal team is working on your defense, but Buck..." She paused, using his first name for the first time. "This is going to get worse before it gets better. Are you prepared for that?" Buck thought about Chloe's determination, about the truth he was fighting to expose. "Yes, ma'am. Whatever it takes." As Colonel Miller left, Buck stared at his reflection in the window. His career, his reputation, his freedom, everything hung in the balance. But he couldn't back down now. Too many young lives depended on exposing the truth about Blackwood's corrupt training system. The military courtroom felt suffocating as Buck sat rigidly at the defense table. His dress uniform, usually a source of pride, now seemed to choke him. The morning's testimony had been brutal, with a parade of recruits describing his excessive force and sadistic training methods in vivid detail. Major Phillips, acting as prosecutor, paced before the panel with practiced confidence. "And would you say Sergeant Morrison appeared to take pleasure in causing pain during these training sessions?" The young recruit, Private Jenkins, nodded earnestly. "Yes, sir. He would smile when someone couldn't continue, sir. Called it weakness leaving the body." Buck's military defense counsel looked overwhelmed, his objections consistently overruled by the tribunal president, another of Blackwood's carefully chosen allies. The morning dragged on with testimony after testimony, each one more damaging than the last. General Blackwood sat in the gallery, his face a mask of stern disappointment that barely concealed his satisfaction. During a brief recess, Buck overheard two panel members discussing how unfortunate it was to see a decorated sergeant lose his way. When court resumed, Major Phillips produced training logs and medical reports, all expertly modified to support the prosecution's narrative. Buck's stomach churned as he recognized his own signature on documents he'd never seen before. "The prosecution calls General Harrison Blackwood," Phillips announced. Blackwood took the stand with dignified gravity, playing the role of disappointed mentor perfectly. "It pains me deeply to be here today," he began, his voice heavy with manufactured regret. "Sergeant Morrison was one of our finest instructors, but something changed in recent months. His methods became increasingly aggressive, despite my personal warnings to maintain appropriate training standards." Buck's hands clenched under the table as Blackwood wove truth and lies together seamlessly. The general described Buck's erratic behavior and concerning reports from other instructors, painting a picture of a trusted sergeant spiraling out of control. "And when you confronted him about these issues," Phillips prompted, "he became defensive, hostile even," Blackwood replied smoothly. "When I suggested he take some leave to decompress, he threatened to fabricate allegations against command staff in retaliation." The panel members nodded gravely, scribbling notes. Buck felt the noose tightening with each perfectly crafted lie. During cross-examination, his defense counsel's attempts to challenge Blackwood's testimony fell flat against the general's practiced responses. The afternoon session was drawing to a close when an unexpected commotion arose outside the courtroom. The doors opened and Colonel Miller entered, followed by Chloe in a neat blue dress. The 8-year-old's presence caused immediate whispers among the gallery. Even General Blackwood looked momentarily startled. "Your Honor," Colonel Miller addressed the tribunal president, "I request permission for an additional character witness for the defense." Major Phillips jumped to his feet. "Objection! This witness wasn't on the approved list, and surely a child cannot provide relevant testimony in a court-martial proceeding." "Your Honor," Colonel Miller countered. "This witness has direct relevant experience with Sergeant Morrison's character and conduct. Her testimony goes to the heart of his alleged behavior toward those under his authority." The tribunal president frowned, looking from Colonel Miller to Chloe, then to General Blackwood, whose face had grown notably tense. "I'll allow it," he finally declared, "but keep it brief." Chloe walked to the witness stand, her small frame barely visible behind it. The sight of her there, dwarfed by the formal military setting but sitting perfectly straight, created a striking image that caught everyone's attention. "Please state your name for the record," the defense counsel requested gently. "Chloe Miller," she answered clearly, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "And do you know Sergeant Morrison?" "Yes, sir. He's the sergeant who didn't think I could do push-ups at Family Day." A few chuckles broke out in the gallery, quickly silenced by the tribunal president's stern look. "Could you tell us about that day?" Chloe nodded, her expression serious. "Sergeant Morrison said I couldn't do 5 push-ups, but I did 50 instead. Perfect form, just like my dad taught me." She paused, looking directly at Buck. He was mean at first, but then he changed. He started helping other kids at the gym learn proper form. He even helped Tommy Martinez, who was scared of doing pull-ups, feel brave enough to try. The defense counsel smiled encouragingly. "How often have you seen Sergeant Morrison at the gym since Family Day?" 2 times a week. He volunteers there now, teaching kids whose moms and dads are deployed." Chloe's voice grew more confident. "He's not mean anymore. He's strict about doing exercises right so nobody gets hurt, but he's always patient, even when little Joey dropped the medicine ball on his foot." The gallery laughed again, and this time even the tribunal president's lips twitched slightly. "One last question," the defense counsel said. "Why did you want to testify today?" Chloe sat up even straighter. "Because Sergeant Morrison is a good person who made a mistake and fixed it. My dad says that's what real strength is, admitting when you're wrong and trying to be better." She looked directly at the panel members. "And I think someone who helps military kids feel strong while their parents are away deserves a second chance." Buck felt moisture in his eyes as he watched this small, brave girl defend him with more conviction than any military lawyer could muster. In the gallery, he noticed General Blackwood's face had gone pale, his carefully constructed narrative suddenly challenged by the simple, honest testimony of a child. Major Phillips stood, his face tense. "Miss Miller, isn't it true that Sergeant Morrison initially mocked you in front of everyone at Family Day?" Chloe nodded calmly. "Yes, sir. But that's why what happened after is so important." "What do you mean?" the defense counsel asked gently. "Well, after Family Day, I saw Sergeant Morrison at Amanda's gym. He was watching the kids' class from the doorway, looking kind of lost." Chloe's clear voice carried through the silent courtroom. "Then one day, Tommy was crying because he couldn't do a pull-up and Sergeant Morrison came over. He didn't yell or make fun like before. Instead, he got down on one knee and showed Tommy how to start with jumping pull-ups first." Colonel Miller approached the bench with a folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit these volunteer logs and parent testimonials from the Fort Braxton Family Fitness Program." As the documents were distributed to the panel, Chloe continued. "Sergeant Morrison taught us that being strong isn't about showing off or making others feel weak. He says real strength is about helping others become stronger too." Buck felt his throat tighten as Chloe described their training sessions. He remembered the moment she'd taught him that lesson, though she probably didn't realize it. "Every Tuesday and Thursday he helps kids like me who miss their deployed parents," Chloe explained. "He teaches us exercises, but he also listens when we're sad or scared. He tells us it's okay to feel that way, that our parents would be proud of us for being brave enough to keep trying." Colonel Miller stepped forward again. "Permission to present additional evidence, Your Honor." At the tribunal president's nod, she played a video on the courtroom screen. It showed Buck working with a group of military children at the gym, his manner patient and encouraging as he helped them learn proper form for various exercises. "This transformation wasn't just limited to volunteer work," Colonel Miller stated. "I've compiled reports from Sergeant Morrison's most recent training cycles, showing significantly improved recruit performance and decreased injury rates, all while maintaining required readiness standards. Chloe watched the video with a small smile. That's from when he helped Sarah learn to do a proper squat. Her dad's in Afghanistan, and she wanted to be strong for when he comes home, just like I did. And how did Sergeant Morrison help you understand strength differently? The defense counsel asked. He told me that my dad would be prouder of me for helping other kids than for doing 100 push-ups by myself. Chloe's voice grew softer. He said that protecting others is harder than being tough, and that's why it makes you stronger inside where it really matters. Major Phillips tried to object, but Chloe continued, her voice growing stronger. When Joey was scared to try the climbing wall, Sergeant Morrison climbed it with him, one step at a time. When Katie missed her mom on deployment, he helped her make a workout calendar to count down the days. He doesn't make anyone feel bad anymore. He makes us feel brave. Buck watched as the panel members' expressions softened. Even the tribunal president was leaning forward, engaged by Chloe's earnest testimony. Last week, Chloe added, he told us that his biggest mistake was thinking that being a good soldier meant making others afraid of you. He said real warriors protect people. They don't hurt them just to prove they can. She looked directly at the panel. That's the Sergeant Morrison I know now. The one who helps us be brave when we're scared and strong when we feel weak. Colonel Miller stepped forward one final time, presenting performance evaluations and letters from recruits' families. The evidence shows a clear evolution in Sergeant Morrison's training philosophy and methods. He's transformed from a feared instructor into a respected mentor who builds strength through support, rather than intimidation. The tribunal president stood, his weathered face solemn as he addressed the courtroom. In light of the evidence presented and testimony given, this court finds Sergeant Buck Morrison not guilty of all charges. He paused, turning his stern gaze toward General Blackwood. Furthermore, based on the documentation provided by Colonel Miller, we are recommending an immediate investigation into General Harrison Blackwood's conduct regarding the systematic cover-up of training injuries and falsified readiness reports. Buck watched as military police officers approached General Blackwood, who sat rigid with anger. The general's face had turned an alarming shade of red as he was escorted from the courtroom. The man who had shaped Buck's harsh training philosophy for so many years now faced his own justice. Colonel Janet Miller approached Buck as the courtroom cleared, extending her hand. Sergeant Morrison, your courage in coming forward made this possible. The investigating committee has already uncovered evidence of at least 23 covered-up training accidents under Blackwood's command. Buck shook her hand firmly, still processing the morning's events. Thank you, Colonel, but I wouldn't have seen the truth without Chloe's help. He glanced at the small girl standing proudly beside her mother, her father's arm around her shoulders. About that, Colonel Miller smiled, pulling a folder from her briefcase. I have a proposition for you. We're establishing a new youth fitness and resilience program at Fort Braxton. Given your recent experience and the impressive results with the volunteer program, I'd like to recommend you as the lead instructor. Buck's eyes widened. Ma'am. The position would involve developing fitness programs for military children, with a focus on emotional resilience during deployments. She handed him the folder. You've found your calling, Sergeant. These kids need someone who understands both military discipline and compassionate leadership. 2 weeks later, Buck stood on the parade ground where his transformation had begun. This time, instead of intimidating recruits, he watched as Chloe led a group of 30 military children through a series of partner exercises. Remember, Chloe called out to her young peers, helping your partner makes both of you stronger. Buck smiled as he watched the children working together, encouraging each other through modified push-ups and squats. The fear and intimidation that had once defined his training sessions had been replaced by laughter and mutual support. Staff Sergeant David Miller approached, his limp barely noticeable now. Quite a difference from family day, isn't it, Sergeant Morrison? Yes, sir, Buck nodded. Your daughter taught me more about strength than 25 years of military service. They watched as Colonel Miller joined Chloe at the front of the group. Mother and daughter demonstrated a synchronized push-up routine they had developed, moving in perfect unison as David Miller counted cadence for them. Ready to join us, Sergeant Morrison? Chloe called out, her face bright with enthusiasm. Buck stepped forward, taking his place beside the Miller family. As they moved through the routine together, he felt a profound sense of purpose wash over him. Here, helping these children build strength through support rather than fear, he had found his true mission. The sound of young voices counting in unison filled the morning air, punctuated by words of encouragement and celebration of each other's successes. Buck realized that real strength wasn't measured in how many recruits he could break down, but in how many young lives he could help build up. As the demonstration concluded, Buck watched the Miller family embrace, their shared pride and joy evident in their faces. He understood now that his journey from feared drill sergeant to respected mentor hadn't been a fall from power. It had been an elevation to something far more meaningful. In these children of service members, he had found not just students, but a chance to create a legacy of strength built on protection, support, and understanding. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.